welcome and happy Friday. Welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Quinn, and we are also, of course, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Got a great show for you today, the Friday show. We're going to talk a little bit about what could be coming up this coming NFL season. We're going to look at some teams that did not make the playoffs last year that could potentially unseat their division rivals as division champions. We're going to take a look at some of those guys. We're going to also take a look at some teams that made the playoffs last year who may miss the playoffs this year. Now, after the NFL draft has been completed and the rosters are starting to take shape a little bit. So we're going to dive a little bit more into that and make sure you stick around for it later in the show. And we're going to talk about College Corner segment, the season preview for the Baylor Bears over in the Big 12. So we're going to talk about them, so definitely make sure you stick around for that. Before we go ahead and get started, I do want to just remind you guys that if you have any questions or any comments or anything that you want to add to the show, definitely go ahead and do that over on the Super Chat. And if you have a question or a comment or just a tip or donation or anything that you want to add, definitely go over and do that, whether it is one of those or just an opinion that you have to share. Don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support the channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate all of the support. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit that Super Chat button, and let's keep this show interactive and exciting. And if you prefer, you can also go to the GSMCsports.net website to tip, donate, and leave a question or a comment there. We couldn't do what we do without you guys, and we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. And once again, the link, in case you have a question or anything you want to add, is GSMCsports.net. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the first part of our show here. Like I said, previously mentioned in the intro there, we're going to talk about some teams that made the playoffs last year who I believe have a chance of missing the playoffs this coming season. We're just going to get right into it. I'm going to start with the first team. Is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mainly that is because of the questions at quarterback. We still don't know really what they are going to do. The Aaron Rodgers thing is still a possibility, but the longer and longer it goes on, the more and more likely it's starting to, kind of feel like maybe Aaron Rodgers does decide to retire. With that happening, it's kind of left the Steelers quarterback situation kind of up in the air. There's not really anything that they have as far as a plan that's set in stone. If they were to not get Aaron Rodgers, then it would most likely be Mason Rudolph or possibly Kirk Cousins if they decide to trade for him. But more than likely it would be Mason Rudolph that would lead the way, and you would bring in either a veteran backup or, have Will Howard be the number 2 guy. But either way, that along with a tough division, an increasingly tough division with the Bengals and the Ravens. Of course, the Ravens perennial Super Bowl contenders. Bengals had a rough year last year with a poor start, but that offense is one of the best in the NFL. So, that's also a problem. And the defense, I'm sure, will be better than it was last year, considering it was historically bad for the Bengals last year. So that's a lot of tough competition. I'm not saying that the Steelers are going to have a non-losing season under Mike Tomlin for the first time, but I do believe that it's very possible that they could miss the playoffs entirely this coming season, given the questions at quarterback. Plus, if Aaron Rodgers even does come, we don't know how effective he's going to be in that system. That's kind of remains to be seen. But the Steelers I have there, another team that might surprise some people that I put on here, and I'm not saying that this will absolutely happen. I just think it's a team to think about, and that is the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings, of course, have a really solid team all around them, but once again, the questions remain at quarterback, much like with the Steelers' situation in terms of questions at quarterback. The only difference is that the Vikings have a young rookie. They just don't know what they have in him yet because he hasn't had a chance to play in a regular season game because he was hurt all of last year during his rookie campaign. So questions there. There's always the possibility that there could be some bumps and bruises along the way, in terms of him getting a feel for the offense and a feel for playing in the NFL. Not to mention, not all 4 teams in that division are going to make the playoffs. It's a very tough division, just like it was last year, and every team has arguably gotten better this year. I think the Vikings kind of went sort of linear with it as far as the draft and everything. I don't think they had a bad draft. Don't think they had an amazing draft either. I think they got what they needed to get. But yeah, that's a tough division. You've got the Packers, of course, are very good. The Lions, have been the division champs for the past few years. And even the Bears have gotten, incredibly interesting, at least, because we haven't seen anything on the field yet. But at least in terms of what they've done in the offseason, on paper, it looks like they should be much improved this year. So it's going to be a tough season for every team in that division. And the Vikings are the only team in that division right now that has a question mark, so to speak, at quarterback, and that's J.J. McCarthy, because we just don't know, because we haven't seen him play in a regular season game yet, so we don't know how good he is or isn't. So with that, accompanied with the tough schedule within the division, I kind of think that the Vikings are one of those teams that could be on the outside looking in at the end of the season. Another team on here is another that might be a little bit of a surprise to some people, but I put the Rams on here. Just mainly because the Rams last year, though they were competitive in the playoffs, they did finish 10-7, so it wasn't like they, ran over all of the teams that they played. And, they did add a couple of pieces here, but this is really not so much an indictment on the Rams as a team, so much as it is kind of a testament to at least a couple of teams in that division. Mainly the Arizona Cardinals, I think, have gotten a lot better over this offseason. They've really tackled the defensive front, which is what they really needed to do. They have some good young players on offense. Of course, Kyler Murray can be a decent quarterback. James Conner, I still think, is a pretty solid running back. So Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, is the wide receiver one, the young guy coming into his second season. And I just really like what they did defensively. So I just think that the Cardinals, they may not necessarily have to be much better than 10-7 to win this division, because I think the 49ers are going to be better too, because they were, incredibly injured last year, and I don't think it's going to be quite so severe this year. So they're still a well-coached team, and they still have good players on that team. So the Niners could be a challenge as well. And, of course, you can't overlook the Seahawks too. They've made a couple of moves. They've changed their team up quite a bit in the past year or so. Of course, they no longer have Geno Smith under center there. It's Sam Darnold, and, of course, Sam Darnold bringing in all that hype from the Minnesota days that he had, or the one season he had in Minnesota last year, where he really played exceptionally well for a good chunk of the season anyway, until later in the year when he kind of faded a little bit in the last 2 games. But so there's still question marks there, but the Cardinals, I really like what they're doing. So it's going to be, again, much like the Vikings, a tough division for the Rams to get through. I'm not saying that they can't do it, but I do think that they are probably more likely of the teams that made the playoffs in the NFC that could potentially miss the playoffs this year, because it is a loaded NFC as well. The AFC gets talked about a lot about how loaded it is, but the NFC has some very good teams as well. So it's going to be a tough road, but the Rams could absolutely do it. They've got veteran leadership all across the board. So we'll have to see if I'm right or wrong there. But the other team I have on here is the team that plays in the same building, and that's the Chargers. Now, I know it's kind of funny to put the Chargers in 2 separate categories here, because I do have them in a later list of teams that could potentially dethrone the division champion from a year ago. I have them listed there because that is, I still believe that the Chargers can be good enough to be the AFC West champions. But they also have the possibility of, kind of going back to the Chargers' ways. They have a lot of expectation, and they just don't really follow through. Plus, it is a very tough division, and it's not every single year that you're going to get a division that has 3 teams go to the playoffs through it. So it's very possible that only 2 teams get into the playoffs from that division, and that's going to leave somebody on the outside looking in. And when I just look at everything, I never picked the Raiders to be a playoff team anyway. So I'm kind of thinking of the other teams in that division. The Chiefs, I don't believe, are missing the playoffs at all. The Broncos, I think, could contend for the AFC West title. Either way, I don't think they missed the playoffs either. And this is, of course, barring any injury to any one of these teams. But that kind of leaves the Chargers on the outside looking in if two teams were to only get through to the playoffs in this division anyway. So Chargers is a possibility, I think, for sure. But they could also still be very good and win that division given the offseason additions that they've made. It's just kind of a weird situation, but I wanted to add them on here just because it is kind of a unique situation over there. The last team that I have on this list that I'm going to talk about before we move on is the Houston Texans. And this is kind of just because the AFC South is always so wide open. Nobody is really very competitive consistently anyway in that division. The Jags seem to have gotten at least a little bit better. The Colts are kind of always middle of the pack, kind of an 8-9, 9-8 sort of team just about every year. I don't think that changes this year. The Titans, if they strike gold on, Cam Ward, then maybe they can make a run. But this is kind of, like I said, just an indictment on kind of what I saw from the Texans last year, as well as just the fact that this division is usually kind of wide open because it's not super competitive. But the Texans had some sort of, they had some struggles last year throughout the course of the season. I think a lot of people would agree that they weren't the team that we saw them as when C.J. Stroud was a rookie. I think a lot of people would agree with that, but they still managed to get a playoff win last year despite all of that. So there are still talented players on that team. If you look at it on paper, the Texans probably are the best team in that division. But other teams could sneak up on them. The Jags, if Travis Hunter really hits, Trevor Lawrence can still be a decent quarterback. And they've got some pretty solid players on that offense. That wide receiver room is pretty solid up and down. So the Jags could maybe make a little bit of a push. Like I said, this is not a division that I'm expecting a 12 or 13 win team to come out of. I'm expecting maybe a 9 or 10 win team that wins this division, and the Jags could possibly do that. I think they would be the most likely team out of any team in that division other than the Texans. If anybody was, I'd probably say the Jags, just because I don't trust the Colts and, the Titans. They're still very, very far off from being competitive, in my opinion, unless they strike gold with Cam Ward. Who knows? But we'll have to see when the season rolls around. But we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk some NFC North. We're going to do some post-draft analysis, post-draft preview of their season coming up here. So stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Before we get on into the next segment of the show here when we talk about the NFC North, just want to give you guys another quick reminder that if you want to contribute to the show in any way, you can always head over and hit the Super Chat button, the Super Chat box, to go ahead and leave a question or a comment there. Or if you want to leave a tip, a donation, or just a general question or comment, you can always go to the GSMC Sports.net website as well if you want to be a part of the show. So definitely do that if you want to add your comment or question to the show. So let's go ahead and get into the next part of the show. And we're going to be talking about the NFC North a little bit here. Just kind of going over a little bit of what they've done this offseason, each team in this particular division, and kind of see where they could end up at the end of the year. For the Green Bay Packers, that's who we're going to start off with first. Their draft picks, just kind of run down some of the more notable guys. For the first time in over 20 years, the Green Bay Packers selected a wide receiver, a skill position, in the first round of the NFL draft. And they take Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas, highly sought-after wide receiver, fastest receiver from the NFL Combine. So the Packers get a very, very good wide receiver to add to that receiver room that is in desperate need of an improvement due to the injury to Christian Watson, and then, of course, no real number one receiving threat on that team. So adding Matthew Golden, they're hoping that he can develop into potentially a wide receiver one. Either way, their wide receiver room gets increasingly better with that selection. They also added a little bit more to the wide receiver room in the later rounds by getting Savion Williams, the wide receiver from TCU. So add a little bit of extra depth there, and then they, of course, shored up their offensive line in the second round with Anthony Belton, the offensive tackle from NC State. Some other additions that they've had this offseason, they signed guard Aaron Banks, a 4-year, $77 million deal to help protect Jordan Love. One of the bigger signings or additions that they've had to their team this offseason was cornerback Nate Hobbs coming over from the Raiders, one of the more sought-after secondary players in free agency this past March, or this past spring or offseason, or whatever the case. He signed a 4-year, $48 million deal. They also more recently signed Mecole Hardman on a 1-year deal, so adding some more bodies to that wide receiver room as well. And then, of course, they re-signed their kicker, Brandon McManus, a 3-year, $15 million deal. So those are just some of the more notable moves that the Packers have made so far this offseason. I do think that the Packers have absolutely got what it takes to win this division. With the questions surrounding the Detroit Lions with all of their coaching staff and all that, I think this could be a perfect sort of year for the Packers to really kind of assert themselves in the division, because I do think that they've gotten better, particularly on offense, of course, but the defense, though they do probably need a couple of other pieces before you can really say that they're an elite defense. They're still a solid defense overall. They did get some edge rushing depth in the later rounds of the NFL draft, taking Baron Sorrell, the edge rusher from Texas, and Colin Oliver, edge rusher from Oklahoma State, and the fourth and fifth round picks respectively. So they did add some room there, and they did also take a defensive lineman from Georgia, Warren Brinson, in the 6th round as well. So adding some depth to that defensive line, definitely a necessity, a need for this Packers defense. But I still think that they can, regardless, be a threat in the NFC North. It's going to probably be a 2-team race, in my opinion, when it comes to who wins that division. And I think it's going to be between the Lions and the Packers. So that's what I think of the Packers. Moving on to the Detroit Lions. Some of the additions that they have made free agency-wise, they went and they got DJ Reed, cornerback from the New York Jets. He was ranked as one of the highest-ranked corners that was available in this past offseason. So he goes there for a 3-year, $48 million deal. They also added some depth at the quarterback position, signing Kyle Allen on a 1-year deal coming over from the Steelers. They also take tight end depth, Kenny Yeboah, also coming over from the Jets. Rock Yassin and Avonte Maddox to help shore up the secondary as well. So, of course, with them losing Carlton Davis in the offseason, they definitely wanted to try and upgrade that position as much as they could. They, add 2 guys to add some depth. Avonte Maddox could also be a pretty solid pickup for them, kind of an under-the-radar sort of pick. But as far as what they did in the NFL draft, they went kind of heavy in the first round on the defensive line. They take Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. Big nose tackle there should definitely help that defensive line, along with Aiden Hutchinson. And once he gets 100% healthy, which he should be by the time week 1 rolls around, as he was actually pretty close to being healthy. If the Lions would have made a run to the Super Bowl last year, he probably could have ended up playing in that Super Bowl if he made it there. So, you would kind of think that he would be ready by the time week 1 rolls around. Just going on with the rest of their draft, they also took a couple wide receivers in this draft, taking Isaac Tesla from Arkansas. That's round 3, number 70 overall. And they also take a wide receiver with their final pick of the entire draft in round 7, number 244 overall, taking Dominic Lovett from Georgia. So adding some depth pieces to the wide receiver room, and an already talented roster on offense for the Detroit Lions. I think, like I kind of mentioned with the Packers, they're going to be right up there as a team that's going to be competing for the NFC North title. I think, like I said before, 2-team race, Packers, Lions. Really like Jared Goff, really like Jahmyr Gibbs. That running attack. Dan Campbell is also one of my favorite coaches in this league. So I really like what they've done. It is going to be kind of interesting to see what they do, having to replace both the defensive and offensive coordinators in Aaron Glenn and, of course, Ben Johnson, who went to the Bears. So that'll be kind of a ongoing story as the season goes along as to how they kind of manage replacing both of those guys, both of which who were very good at what they did. So especially Ben Johnson on that offense. That's going to be the biggest change, really, is Ben Johnson no longer being the offensive coordinator. But you have to think that with all the, intelligent minds in that building, that they would be able to, come up with an offense that's pretty similar to the one that Ben Johnson was running. That way they don't have to change too much about the offense. So it might be a little bit more of a smoother transition as we get into the next part of the off-season and the training camp, and then ultimately the regular season. So moving on to other team in the in this particular division, was the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that I kind of already talked about a little bit in the earlier segments as a team that I think could potentially miss the playoffs this year after making it last year. Like I said, that's mainly just because of the competition that's within this division that's so tough, But taking a look at just some of the things that they have done this offseason so far, as far as their draft picks, they didn't have a ton of draft picks. They only had 5, so they technically only picked in 4 rounds of the NFL draft this year. That was round 1, where they took Donovan Jackson, the offensive lineman out of Ohio State. Round 3, they took a wide receiver, Ty Felton, from Maryland. Then they only had 3 more picks after that, 1 in round 5 and 2 in round 6. They take Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins from Georgia in the 5th round, linebacker Kobe King from Penn State in the 6th round, and then the final pick immediately after that round 6 pick was Gavin Bartholomew, tight end from Pittsburgh. So the draft, they didn't really make too much of a splash overall. They only had 5 picks total. Donovan Jackson should be a pretty solid offensive lineman for them, though, so that was a solid pick at least. But really, it's what they have done in free agency that I think is much more impressive than what they've done in the NFL draft. They took Jonathan Allen from the Commanders, defensive tackle. They also signed Javon Hargrave over from the 49ers. They shore up their offensive line a little bit more with Will Fries from the Colts. They also add more wide receiver depth with Rondale Moore, taking Byron Murphy as well. They're re-signing him, able to take him. Aaron Jones, they re-sign him, and Jordan Mason as well. And they also sign Jeff Okudah, the corner from Houston from last year. So they have made some good moves in this offseason. This really is just the question of quarterback, really. Since we don't really know a lot about J.J. McCarthy and how he can really fit into an NFL offense, we don't really know that yet because we haven't seen him play. So obviously there's questions there. So that kind of raises some concerns. But if they can pull it all together, and if J.J. McCarthy can be even just a solid quarterback, he doesn't have to be amazing with the team that they have around them. If he can just be solid, then, maybe the Vikings can make another run like they did last year in terms of having a very good regular season like they did. But they'll need to get better in the playoffs regardless if they do make the playoffs, of course. But that is the Vikings' final team on this division, the Chicago Bears. I've been high on the Bears this offseason so far because I've really liked what they've been able to do in free agency and, trading and, things like that. Really completely revamped their coaching staff, which is something that was way overdue. But they have a new coaching staff in place now. Ben Johnson bringing over some guys from his Detroit days, and, of course, bringing a whole new philosophy into that room as well. So that should be nothing but positivity as far as offense is concerned. They went in the NFL draft as well, and they added some pieces to that offense. Colston Loveland, who is one of the one or the best tight end in this draft class, depending on who you're asking. Tyler Warren has been talked about as, technically the best tight end in the class, but Colston Loveland is probably a better all-round tight end, more complete tight end, and he's coming over, of course, from Michigan. He gets selected in the first round, and then, of course, they get another guy, Luther Burden, the third wide receiver from Missouri. They get him in the second round, which I think is a very good value. He could come in and be a very good target for Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams, this is going to be a very, very important year for him. He's going to have a lot of pressure on him. I know there's been the comparisons between him and Jaden Daniels because they both came out in the same year. But I don't think there's as much pressure on Jaden Daniels this year as there is Caleb Williams. There's a whole new offensive system in place now. He has weapons aplenty. There's no excuse at this point. The Bears need to actually start, performing on the field because they've had hype the past couple of off seasons because of the moves that they have made, and I do think they are trending in the right direction, despite the fact that they had a rough year last year, especially getting rid of that whole coaching staff. I think was a huge step in the right direction. So I do think that they're moving forward in the right way, but they need to actually have it all come together on the field before people can actually start believing in this team. But it's going to be a big year for Caleb Williams for sure. But he's got plenty of help. The Bears even went out, got a couple of other depth pieces at wide receiver. Olamide Zaccheaus coming over from Washington, Devin Duvernay as well getting added to that wide receiver room. Biggest addition that they have had all offseason, though, is Grady Jarrett coming over from the Falcons, big defensive tackle. And, of course, they have upgraded their offensive line, taking Joe Thuney from the Chiefs and signing Jonah Jackson from the Rams as well to completely revamp that offensive line. So they've done all of the right things that you want. So it's really just a matter of them actually putting it together on the field. So we'll see if they can do that and if they can live up to the expectations that a lot of Bears fans have for them this coming season. So that's going to do it for that segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about the NFC South and look at their post-draft preview of this upcoming season. So stick with us. We'll be right back right after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys. Welcome back to the show here. Excuse me. So we're going to get right into the next segment here. We're going to talk a little bit about the NFC South. We've covered a number of divisions to this point. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the New Orleans Saints that make up the NFC South. Last year, of course, the Buccaneers winning that division after the Falcons kind of held the lead in that division for a good chunk of the year before the Buccaneers were able to kind of come back in and go on a late season run and make it to the playoffs. They have a very, very strong offense, that is for sure, as far as the Buccaneers are concerned. That's who we're going to start with here. Taking a look at what they did in the NFL draft to add to that offense, and kind of a surprising move, at least in my opinion anyway. They went and they got wide receiver Emeka Egbuka in the first round out of Ohio State. Now, it's not surprising in the sense that I think Egbuka is a bad player, because he's not. He's a very good receiver, and I'm sure he'll do just fine in Tampa. I was just surprised because they had just re-signed Chris Godwin. Of course, they re-signed Mike Evans during the season last year, so the wide receiver room is pretty packed already, and the fact that they took a first-round receiver this year in the NFL draft I thought was kind of surprising. But either way, that should be a very good trio of wide receivers for Baker Mayfield to work with. The Buccaneers really trying to load up the offense. Last year, Baker Mayfield had over 40 touchdown passes, so adding even more to that wide receiver room and just to that offense in general is a positive thing. The defense, of course, is really where the areas of need are. If you take a look at what they did in the draft, they went pretty heavy in the first few rounds as far as defense is concerned. Of course, they take the wide receiver in the first round, but in the second round, they go corner, Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. Round 3, they take Jacob Parrish, another corner, this one out of Kansas State. Round 4, they take an edge rusher and David Walker out of Central Arkansas. Then take a defensive lineman with the 5th pick, Elijah Roberts out of SMU, before finally taking Tez Johnson, wide receiver from Oregon, in the 7th round. That's a wide receiver that could actually really help them as well. So a very solid NFL draft for them. They went really heavy on the defensive line and just defense in general, which was a smart move because that was really where, most of the needs were in terms of, this NFL draft in particular. But taking a wide receiver with the 19th overall pick was a surprise for sure. But, it's a very good offense, so I understand you want to keep it going as much as possible. Plus, Chris Godwin is coming off of a knee injury, so you don't know if he's going to be exactly to where he was last year when he was, the year before when he's been so productive. So I could understand taking a wide receiver in that regard, I guess. But I guess just first-round pick, it was just a little bit surprising. But still a good pickup regardless. Taking a look at what they also did this offseason just in terms of other signings, other additions. The most notable, of course, being Hassan Reddick, the outside linebacker coming over from the Jets. He signed a 1-year contract. Of course, Hassan Reddick's really most of his production came when he was in Philadelphia, but then when he was in the Jets, but then Philadelphia had him for a year, but he didn't really do much. So then the Jets, of course, sent him over to Tampa Bay on a 1-year contract. So they also re-signed Levante David, linebacker as well, so that adds some continuity there. So good move there from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I still think they are the class of this division. I think it's their division to lose at this point. I just don't think that the Saints are very good. I think they're probably the worst team in this division. The Panthers do have a little bit of optimism, but the Falcons probably the second best team in this division. The questions around Michael Penix and how he handles a full season, that is really the biggest question for the Falcons. And as we kind of move on to the Falcons here, taking a look at what they did in free agency, they've added a few guys here and there, nothing super splashy. Taking Jamal Agnew, wide receiver free agent, on a 1-year deal. Also taking linebacker Divine Diablo on a 2-year deal. More notable name, Leonard Floyd. They were able to get him on a 1-year, $10 million deal. And Felipe Franks, tight end, who also was a quarterback as well. They signed him, not really expecting much from him. He's probably just a camp body or, something like that, or a depth piece. In the NFL draft, they went and they took 2 edge rushers in the first round. They were able to trade back into the first round after their first-round pick on number 15, where they took Jalen Walker out of Georgia. They trade back in Not crazy about what they gave up, though, but they do trade back in and they get James Pierce Jr., edge rusher from Tennessee. They also went defense on their next 2 picks as well, taking safety Xavier Watts and defensive back Billy Bowman. So really go heavy on the in the NFL draft as far as defensive players are concerned, which makes sense because they really want to shore up that defensive line, especially after losing Grady Jarrett to the Chicago Bears. That was kind of sort of an unexpected development there that kind of just went really quickly when it did. But they're trying to, of course, replace him as much as they possibly can. So by going and drafting those 2 guys in the first round definitely is a need because they've been one of the worst pass rushing teams in the NFL in recent years. So they definitely need to improve upon that for sure. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers. I really like what the Carolina Panthers did in the NFL draft in particular, especially with that first pick, getting Ted McMillan from Arizona. In my opinion, the best wide receiver that was available in the draft outside of course, the Travis Hunter situation since he plays 2 positions. But best pure receiver in the NFL draft, in my opinion. He goes to the Panthers. Now, Panthers coaching staff, Dave Canales, he has talked about this offseason repeatedly that he wants more weapons around Bryce Young because there is a lot of optimism surrounding the Panthers right now because it seems like Bryce Young might have turned a corner a little bit towards the end of last year as he started his career very, very poorly, struggled mightily in his first, season and a half essentially, and then getting benched last year and then coming back in, and he's actually starting to show a little bit more confidence, a little bit more poise in the pocket, so they actually have a little bit more optimism in Carolina, which is something that they haven't been able to say in quite some time. But as far as the rest of the draft goes, I did like their picks in round 2 and 3, getting 2 edge rushers from the SEC. Nick Scourton coming over from Texas A&M, of course. Everybody kind of knows how good he can be as well. They did add Trevor Etienne to the running back room as well, which I thought was kind of interesting because they still have Chuba Hubbard in the backfield there, and they did also sign Rico Dowdle from the Dallas Cowboys, so it's going to be kind of a crowded backfield for the Panthers. But of course, always trying to replace a guy like Christian McCaffrey. It feels like they've been trying to replace him for a number of years. But Chuba Hubbard is a talented running back, of course, and adding some extra depth behind him, it's never going to hurt, of course. So in the other additions that they have had this offseason as well, they've signed a couple of guys, nothing super crazy in terms of being big splash signings, but a lot of good quality players, depth players, things like that. They went and they signed Raiders safety Trayvon Moehrig just to kind of shore up the secondary a little bit more and possibly have an additional camp body to maybe, go in and play special teams and things like that as well. Minnesota Vikings edge rusher Patrick Jones, they signed him as well as LA Rams defensive tackle Bobby Brown III. The biggest addition that they made as far as free agency is concerned is defensive tackle from the Chiefs, Tershawn Wharton. They go and they sign him. That should help solidify that defensive line a little bit more as we get closer to the NFL season. So it's really going to hinge on what Bryce Young does this season. If he can build on some of the momentum that he had last year, towards the end of last year, then the Panthers could kind of get out of the basement of this division, so to speak. But the team that I'm going to talk about next, I think, is going to be the team that's going to be residing in that basement, and that is the New Orleans Saints. They've done a few things this offseason that are, decent, but a few things that are kind of head-scratching as well. Devon Gaucho, defensive tackle, they got on a trade with the Patriots. He's a 31-year-old defensive tackle. Solid depth piece, not a problem there. Justin Reed, very good signing there. Safety, 28 years old, 3-year, $31.5 million deal. $22 million of it is guaranteed. So getting a couple of good players here and there. Brandon Cooks is a solid receiver, a solid get as well. So some pretty solid picks free agency-wise. As far as the draft is concerned, in the first round they go Kelvin Banks, offensive tackle from Texas. He is a solid offensive tackle. A lot of people kind of thought the Saints were going to go quarterback here, though. The Shedeur Sanders news and all that kind of surrounded the Saints kind of around this pick. And then, of course, when every time their name would come up, people would think that they're possibly going to take Shedeur Sanders. But luckily, they didn't have to wait very long, because in the second round, they take a quarterback, but it was not Shedeur Sanders. It was Tyler Shuck from Louisville. He is, like I've said before, the elder statesman in this NFL draft class. He's only about 25 years old, so it's not like he's super old, but he has the most experience as the starting quarterback in college football. He's played the most football out of any of the quarterbacks that are available in this draft, any of the top ones anyway. So it was a little surprising that they got him here at number 40 in the second round. But again, there are questions surrounding Derek Carr and his availability, so I understand the move. Plus, you're not sure what Derek Carr's availability is going to be in the future as well, given his age and his recent injury history. So getting Tyler Shuck here, I think, is a solid pickup. I'm assuming that he's going to be given a chance to take the starting job, at least for this year, depending on what happens with Derek Carr. We'll just have to see what happens with him, because we're not really sure yet. But a lot of questions surrounding the Saints. They didn't have the greatest cap situation, so they weren't really in a position to kind of go out and get big splash players in free agency. So they really had to depend on the NFL draft. And they did get some solid players overall, but there were some, moves that were a little bit questionable. But we'll see how Tyler Shuck works out for them. I'll be interested to see if he actually does start day one, or if Derek Carr is going to be healthy, or if he's not, maybe they go Spencer Rattler on day one, since he has a familiarity with having some playing time, at least in New Orleans. It's going to be a whole new offense with Kellen Moore as the head coach. So, maybe they give Tyler Shuck the, chance to be the starter if Derek Carr can't go. Why not, is what I say. So that's going to do it for that segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about teams that I believe have a chance to dethrone the division title winners from a year ago. So, of course, there's going to probably be multiple teams from the same division, but that's just kind of teams that I think have a good chance to do it, not teams that will absolutely do it. Otherwise, there would only be, 8 picks here, or, something like that. So stick with us, though. We're going to be right back right after this break, and we're going to talk about that. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, where we're going to get right into our next segment here. I just want to talk about some teams that I think could have a decent chance to be newly crowned division champions this coming season. I'm going to go through some of the teams here. Of course, not every team is going to be accurate, in terms of this happening, because I do have some teams that are from the same division. So obviously 2 teams can't win a division. I don't have to explain that to you. You guys know. You guys aren't idiots. So let's get right into it here. So first team I have on this list, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Bengals I have on here is mainly because of their offense. The offense was incredible last year. Joe Burrow, MVP level numbers last year. But the problem they had last year was their defense. They could not stop anybody. Not a lot of teams could stop them, but they could not stop anybody at all. And Joe Burrow and that offense was essentially forced to try and put up 30-plus points every single week to have a chance to win the game, because the defense was just leaking every chance that they got. So if the Bengals can shore up the defense, if the defense can just be decent, It doesn't even have to be amazing. If they can just be decent, then the Bengals absolutely have a shot to take the division this coming season. The Ravens, of course, are sitting at the top of that division right now, and rightfully so. They've been the best team in the division for at least the past few years. But the Bengals still have a lot of talented players. There is a few questions around Trey Hendrickson. Not really sure if they're going to get a deal done there, but they did add some guys in the NFL draft as well. So they could do that as just a little bit of insurance. Maybe if it works out with Trey Hendrickson, you can have another solid player playing alongside Trey Hendrickson. But either way, they get some backup plans. But if that defense can be at least a bit better than they were last year, I think the Bengals can absolutely challenge for the AFC North title. Moving on to the AFC West, I have two teams from the AFC West here, as I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier with the Chargers, but I have the Broncos here. I've kind of sang the praises of the Broncos for the past few weeks here as we've kind of dove in a little bit more as to what they did and what they've been doing this offseason as opposed to what they did last year and all that stuff and how they've improved the team. So I really like what the Broncos have done. I really like what they did towards the end of last year, getting themselves into position to win or to get into the playoffs. Dominant performance against, admittedly Kansas City's backups to end the year, but still they played very well in that game. And then they, stunned the Bills, at least in the first drive of that playoff game, going down with that big long touchdown pass from Bo Nix in an early 7-0 lead. Unfortunately for the Broncos, they wouldn't score another point in that game and ended up losing 31-7. But, the promise is there. The positive signs are there. Bo Nix has gotten better each time we've seen him. And the Broncos have done a very good job this offseason making that defense that much more, dominant and stout. So if the offense can continue to improve, the defense is already there. They're already an elite level defense, especially adding Jahdae Barron to an already loaded secondary with Defensive Player of the Year Pat Surtain. That's going to be a very difficult team to throw against, very difficult team to move the ball against in general. And they need that kind of defense when you're playing in a division like the AFC West with quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, of course, and, even Geno Smith to a certain extent now that he's the Raiders quarterback. The Raiders will be a little bit better, I would imagine. But they're not on this list because they're not winning the division, in my opinion. But that's why I have the Broncos there. I just really like what they've done so far this offseason. The other team I have from the same division, the Chargers. Like I said earlier in the show, because I also have this team as listed as a team that could potentially miss the playoffs, and they made the playoffs last year. It's just kind of a volatile division. Just with how talented the division happens to have gotten, more and more, really, it's seemingly each year, but especially this year, because even the Raiders have shown improvements. So I think there's going to be one team that is considered a good team in that division that's going to be left out of the playoffs. Maybe even just one team in general in the NFC that's a good, or excuse me, AFC, that's a good team that could be left out just because of how loaded the AFC is. The Chargers could be one of those victims, but they could also win the division. It's just kind of a weird scenario with them. They're talented enough to do both, really. Amari and Hampton, I thought, was a very good pickup, signing Najee Harris to make him kind of pair with Amari and Hampton. That's a good 1-2 punch for that backfield as well. I like everything that they've done so far, and I like Jim Harbaugh as the head coach there. But, it's a tough division, so it's going to be hard for them to get to that point. But I think they have the potential to do it. They have the players and they have the coaching staff to be able to get there. It's just going to be, can they put it all together on the field? Or can they just end up being the same Chargers that we're used to seeing, the team that's seemingly loaded with talent but just can't seem to get over the hump for whatever reason. But the other teams, I have a couple more teams here on this list that could potentially be new division champions, and I have the Washington Commanders on here. And that is because really Jaden Daniels and that offense and the way they played last year. The Eagles, of course, are going to be extremely difficult to get past because they are the best team on paper in the NFL, really, because they won the Super Bowl in dominant fashion last year and really had kind of a dominant overall season as a whole. So the Eagles are sitting on the perch, so it's going to be hard to dethrone them. But the Commanders, they're familiar with the Eagles. They play them twice a year. Though the NFC Championship game was not close, they beat the Eagles last year. And I mean, you could make the argument that yes, Jalen Hurts was not playing in that game. Kenny Pickett was the guy who came in after Jalen Hurts was ruled with a concussion. So I could absolutely understand that argument, but plays still need to be made, and not really anybody from that very vaunted Eagles defense left the field, and the Commanders were still able to move the ball pretty routinely against them. So the Commanders, if they can just get a little bit better on defense, they could unseat the Eagles as division champions. It's probably going to be a little bit of a long shot, but if Jaden Daniels can really grow into his his play from last year, kind of build on that momentum a little bit, then I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he could end up leading them to a division title possibly. Because nobody thought that they were going to make it to the NFC Championship game last year. I mean, I only had them winning about 5 games, and then they get all the way to the NFC title game. So why not? Why can't they win the division next year if they had such a year like they had last year? It's very possible. It's going to be fun to watch that unfold, though. Another team, 2 more teams on this list. I have the Packers and the Cardinals. Both of those teams, I think, could potentially win their divisions this year. The Packers have gotten better and better through each year that Jordan Love has been the starter. They should really come into their own this year, finally adding a new wide receiver piece. For the first time in over 20 years, they draft a wide receiver in the first round. So Matthew Golden will be a good addition to that wide receiver room. Packers overall are always coached very well anyway. So that's going to be a very tough division to watch, a very fun division to watch because of how competitive it'll be. But I think the Packers absolutely have the opportunity, or have the guys and the coaching to be able to get it done. And they haven't won the division in a few years because the Lions, of course, have been as good as they have been under Dan Campbell for these few years that they have been. So it's going to be a challenge. Those Packers-Lions games are always fun to watch. So we'll see if they can do it. But as far as the Cardinals are concerned, I really like what they've done. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. Like what they've done in the offseason thus far, kind of really addressing those defensive needs. And I like Kyler Murray. I still think he has potential to be a solid quarterback. And that division, I think the Rams are a tough team in that division, but I think the Cardinals could beat either of the other teams in the division. The 49ers, I do think they still have good players, but they haven't had necessarily the greatest offseason. So far, they've lost a lot of players, and they haven't really done a tremendous job replacing those guys. Hard to do that with some of the guys, but still haven't been super impressed with what the 49ers have done this offseason. So I think the Cardinals could get past them. I think they could get past the Seahawks because Sam Darnold, the only time we've ever seen him play extremely well is when he's had one of the best receivers in the NFL at his disposal, and probably the best wide receiver room outside of maybe Cincinnati's receiver room in the entire NFL. The Seahawks don't have that. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a solid wide receiver. Cooper Kupp is a solid wide receiver, but Cooper Kupp is also an older wide receiver, so we don't know what exactly we're going to get out of him. He's had some injury issues here in the later years of his career, so we're going to have to kind of see if he can kind of bounce back from sort of an injury-plagued year this past year, and with a new setting, maybe come back and get close to that usual capable level that we're used to seeing from Cooper Kupp. But either way, I like the Cardinals. I think they have a solid chance to win that division. So those are my teams that I think can be new division champions this year. Again, the teams are the Bengals, the Broncos, the Chargers, the Commanders, the Packers, and the Cardinals. Each one of those teams, I think, have a legitimate chance to be crowned new division champs when the season ends later on this fall. So That is going to do it for that segment. When we come back, we're going to dive into our final segment of the day, our College Corner, and we're going to do an outlook, a season preview for the Baylor Bears of the Big 12. So stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Final segment of the day, and then we can send you off into your weekend. Hope you guys all have a great weekend, of course. So let's get right into it. The Baylor Bears, their 2025 season preview here, bouncing back from last year, taking a look at just kind of where they stand as we get into this year. As I can just bring up my notes here. All right. So 8-5 in 2024 last year. So they saw some improvements overall. New offensive coordinator that they had last year, Jake Spavito, with the offense pretty much improving pretty significantly in terms of their total yards per game. Their team's defense kind of struggled, though. That was really the biggest issue for Baylor last year. They gave up a lot of points in a lot of different games, particularly in the early part of the season. They were kind of trying to adapt to their new defensive coordinator, Dave Aranda. So new defensive play calling under Dave Aranda, So they had to kind of adapt to that. So it was a lot of, bumps in the road, so to speak. But in terms of what they're doing here at the start of this season, we're going to just go by position here. Quarterback, for the first time since 2020, there's really no doubt who the unquestioned starting quarterback is going to be this season, and that is the redshirt senior Sawyer Robertson, uncontested QB1 in Baylor's camp. Quarterback room is looking to elevate that top 20 offense that they had last year with the second-year offensive coordinator now, Jake Spavito. And after he took over for DeQuan Finn in 2024, Sawyer Robinson had a very, very good first season as a starter, 7th best quarterback rating in the entire nation. He had 3,071 yards, 28 touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions. So he was tremendous for Baylor throughout the course of the year when he was able to get in there. Behind him, the redshirt freshman duo, Nate Bennett and Auburn transfer Walker White, both of them have stepped up to the plate, and they have learned as much as they can when they've been given the chance. They will battle out for the number 2 job. It seems as though it's probably going to be Nate Bennett when it's all said and done in terms of the number 2 quarterback job, because he did fill in at number 2 when Finn dealt with some injuries a season ago. So likely it's going to be, Robertson and then, of course, Nate Bennett as the number 2 guy, and then Walker White rounding out that quarterback room. That's what it seems like at this point anyway. So we'll see if there's going to be any changes in regards to that. But at running back, you got a couple of guys there that is going to be a very, very quality running back room there. You've got Caden Knighton, 4-star recruit from Pauls Valley High School, and he had 1,883 rushing yards and 38 touchdowns last year, the redshirt freshman. So very good numbers. I mean, high school was always kind of inflated a little bit, but still that's productive numbers right there. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets kind of acclimated into the offense a little bit there. Another highly touted recruit, Michael Turner, he rushed for 1,600 yards and 23 touchdowns when he was a junior at Richland High School. So another good young guy that's a commit that's coming in to this running back room to help. And then, of course, the guys that are going to be most likely going to be the starters, Bryson Washington, former freshman All-American. He's expected to be a valuable part of this offense, as well as Dawson Pendergrast. He's a returning player who's expected to be a key part of the running attack as well. So it's a lot of young guys in that running back room, but still some guys that can, have some quality success for the Baylor team. So moving on to wide receiver, they've got a couple of guys that are returning experience. Josh Cameron, top receiver from last season for Baylor, had 10 touchdown catches last year. Devontae Ross, he was a bright spot for Baylor last year, had just over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns as a junior. A couple of transfer additions that they've had as well. Kobe Prentice coming over from Alabama. He's looking to make an immediate impact. So another guy, Cole Wilson, coming in from Texas State, also expected to contribute pretty heavily when he first comes in. And a couple of other newcomers in terms of recruits. Taz Williams Jr., highly touted 4-star recruit, expected to be a key player if he can return to full strength after an injury kind of set him back a little bit. Ashton Jones and Ja'Cory Watson, other talented true freshmen, in this 2025 class. They've got a lot of talented young guys coming in, so that'll be interesting to see how they kind of implement all of these players and all of their skill sets into this offense. Year 2 under this offense, so we'll see if there's a little bit smoother of a transition for some of these younger players. Jaden Porter and Mason Dossett, returning sophomores and redshirt freshmen respectively, also are expected to contribute to the wide receiver room. Now, on defense, that is where it really is. That's the biggest issue. They allowed 30 or more points in 7 games last year, so that is not going to get it done on any level, much less college football. But that's way too many points to be giving up, especially seven games. You give up 30 or more points. That's pretty crazy. They're going to be leaning heavily on second-year defensive line coach Enoch Brechterfield and a veteran defensive line. They're hoping that they can right the ship early on in spring camp. We'll see if that translates to fall football when we get down to it. But redshirt seniors Cooper Lands and Jackie Marshall, they headline a returning veteran group in that defensive line room. Land spent the majority of his snaps during the past 3 seasons as a defensive tackle, but he did battle some injuries in 2024, and he can start getting reps at defensive end like he did last year, and I'm assuming that that's going to end up being a permanent move coming into this year. That's what all indications are pointing to. Jackie Marshall started all 13 games last year, had an injury-riddled season prior to that, and then broke out last year, and now he's Baylor's highest-graded defensive player by Pro Football Focus from last year. Redshirt sophomore Texas A&M transfer, and I apologize if I get this name wrong, but Samu Taumanu Pepe was the lone portal addition at this position for the Bears. So that is one thing that's, you kind of would have probably wanted to see a little bit more depth there, but they get one guy from that particular position, so they'll have to kind of work with that. But he is a solid guy to have in that defensive line. 6'3", 380-pound nose tackle. He's 30 pounds heavier than Noel, so that's the other guy on the defensive line. So that's a big body to have on the defensive line at least. So hopefully they can get something out of him as well. But a couple of other guys, Brendan Bett and redshirt junior Devontae Tazzino, both returning to step into larger roles this year. Bett redshirted in 2024. He dealt with a lot of injuries, and Tazzino was limited early as well with some injuries of his own before he got back into the rotation for the final 11 games of last year. But the lifeblood of this entire unit starts with the returning redshirt junior Keaton Thomas, who was very, very productive last year. All Big 12 honors his first year in Baylor after transferring from Northeast Mississippi Community College. And in 2024, he had 114 tackles, 7 for a loss, and 2.5 sacks. Very productive throughout the course of the year. He's coming into his next full season in Baylor, so they're expecting pretty good things from him at that position. So he's looking to elevate his game on the field. Meanwhile, you've got Chaney's also, the defensive coordinator, also tasked him with growing even more as a leader to fill Matt Jones's absence, as he is no longer there due to no longer having eligibility after playing with Baylor for 6 seasons. So he earned all Big 12 honors last fall. So, and like I said, he's out of eligibility, so it's going to be a big task to try and fill his shoes for sure. So the experience that they have, that kind of derives from a pair of senior additions that they have from the transfer portal, Fresno State's Phoenix Jackson and Florida International's Travion Barnes. Both players have missed time this spring with injuries, but Barnes in particular, Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year from a year ago. He's already turning heads on and off the field. So Baylor's cornerback situation, they're bolstered by the addition of Caldron Williford, transfer from Tennessee Tech, Calvin Simpson Hunt from Ohio State as well, and they also have a new cornerbacks coach, Paul Gonzalez. He is working with returning players like Tevin Williams III and LeVar Thornton Jr. Baylor also has commitments from some high school cornerbacks, Isaiah Dunson and Tayshawn Wilson. So if they can get all of those guys implemented into the system, then they could have a productive year. Now, last year, of course, they went 8-5 overall. It's the Big 12, so it's not necessarily the Big 10 or the SEC, but there's still some, quality teams out there. They were close to, they finished about sixth, I think it was, in the Big 12 overall. So obviously Colorado is going to probably take a step back a little bit, so maybe they can get at least ahead of them, maybe to a 9-win season, having Sawyer Robertson, as your unquestioned starter. That's the one thing that it's a good thing, because you don't have any real worries there. He's a veteran guy who's going to come in and he's going to be productive for you, and that offense shouldn't miss a beat with him back in the lineup there. So it could be another 8-win season for them. I could absolutely see that happening, but if they can get some elevated play from Sawyer Robertson as far as, maybe pushing forward some momentum that he had towards the end of the year when he, finished with 28 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Still great numbers overall, but he's hoping to probably see a little bit of an uptick in that as well. So all the pieces in place there, so they could, end up having a solid season, but we'll have to see when fall football rolls around. But that should do it for the show overall. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's the Friday show, so I'll, of course, see you guys on Monday. Once again, thank you guys all for tuning into the show. GSMC Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network, Monday through Friday at 9:30 Eastern Time. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It does make a difference, and we also invite you to follow us on all of the social media accounts and for more content and for more updates. So thank you guys once again. Hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you guys right back here on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go